Stephen Campbell, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm super excited to chat with you today. We're taking a little bit of a unique spin on team building and employee engagement. We're going to be talking about this and how we can accomplish it through comedy. And that's really what you focus on in your work and with your firm. And so it's going to be a fascinating conversation to unpack that and really explore that together. As we get started, I wanted to share Stephen's bio with everybody. Stephen Campbell is a stand-up comedian, fundraiser, and social entrepreneur. His company, U Street Comedy, partners with comics from HBO and Comedy Central to produce team-building comedy shows and social impact projects for corporate partners. I just think that's so cool. Before we launch on into the conversation, anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background, personal context? And honestly, I would be really curious as to how you kind of got into this space and made the connection between comedy and team building, employee engagement, social entrepreneurship, and social impact.
Sure. Yeah. And the bio that you read, it encompasses most of what we're doing, but the name of the game over the last 2 years, especially, has been infinite flexibility. We are a bunch of comedians, a bunch of marketers, a bunch of people that have studied and work in social impact. And so we've kind of just been blending it in as much as possible. So I've been a fundraiser for about 10 years. I've been a comedian for 8, and I've always been trying to infuse comedy into some of my fundraising endeavors. And so this is just the current state that it looks like. We incorporated the company at the beginning of 2020, and we were focusing specifically on fundraising and corporate events. 2020 ended up not being the right year to go all in on event production. And so then we pivoted to virtual stuff. So we've done a little over 200 virtual events with different corporate groups, dozens and dozens of in-person stuff as well since over the last 2 years. But we kind of just organically got into it. We started getting people that were outreaching from different professional organizations, alumni organizations, and networking events and stuff like that. And then obviously at networking events and alumni organizations, there's a lot of professionals there that they wanted it for their company. And it just kind of organically grew that way, and so always social impact is what is most important to us. So, it kind of just organic, we do a show with, I don't know if we can say companies, but we do a show with a Fortune 500 company. And one of the people that's on the show is also their social impact person. And then the conversations just organically grow. We have a marketing mix and all that stuff, but we've been very lucky that almost all of our businesses come organically through word of mouth and referrals and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool. And I like how you make these connections and connections that seem to fit for me, but I really don't see a lot of people making those similar connections. So that's probably one of the reasons why you're doing so well. But making the connection between social impact and employee engagement and team building, that's actually huge. There's a lot of research on that, a growing body of research, and then connecting the comedy piece that's a unique little niche and spin on it. So I think that's all just fascinating.
I appreciate it. And could you tell me a little bit, because I know intuitively, and I've seen a study here and there, but do you have any stats on this might be a little bit of a T-bone of a question, but do you have any stats on like what a company's social impact does to employee retention and does for employee satisfaction?
Yeah, great question. I'd have to pull some specific numbers, but what I can say, if I kind of summarize and synthesize what I'm aware of and what I've read, the impact is absolutely large. And
Sure.
what we know is that for particularly younger millennial and Gen Z workers, they really, really desire having work with meaning and purpose. They want to find meaning, purpose, and fulfillment through their jobs. And that doesn't necessarily mean that what they're doing in their day-to-day has to be the core driver of that meaning and purpose, but the company has to find ways to connect their
Sure.
people to that meaning and purpose. And sometimes that happens through extra social impact types of opportunities, through the philanthropic arm or social impact arm of the organization. I've run some studies specifically where, looking at various motivators of employee engagement and satisfaction, and wanting to make a difference in society as an indicator for satisfaction and engagement is among the long list of all the things you would think about should be, included. It's always right at the top of the list. It's always, it's always relationships with your coworkers. It's always meaning and purpose in your work. And it's always, I do work that benefits society.
Yeah.
Those are the core elements, and they're super salient and predictive indicators. And so that alone is a really important thing that I've talked to other people who kind of understand this idea of social impact and social entrepreneurship and how that can contribute to the world of team building and engagement. But it's still a relatively small number of people that kind of are getting that connection. So I kudos to you and your group for doing that.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah. And it is kind of, I am lucky that has always been a driver to figure out how the company can make money while helping people, right? My master's is in social enterprise. And so I created my own focus at Villanova for the MBA program. And it was this interesting thing because we live in this very weird time with this specific thing, the social impact thing, right? Where I presented at the end of my MBA, and everybody there, Villanova usually pushes people into finance and pushes people into consulting and stuff like that. And everybody in my class, not one single person understood why you would infuse a social impact into a profit-driven business model, right? That they just just would not compute. These are very intelligent people that I'm talking about that are getting groomed to be executives in corporate America, and it was not registering, right? So this is 2017 that I graduated. And so we sit in this weird place right now where tons of people are coming out of college. This is our number one. We got to make a social impact. And so these big ass companies are like throwing that over to older people that are really out of touch with what's going on. And it's their job to now be in charge of diversity and inclusion, right? The amount of meetings that I would get into, and for anybody listening, I'm a white dude. I would get into these meetings and it would be all white ladies. And it would be like, we are now discussing diversity and inclusion. It's like, okay, well, I don't think I'm the person you were supposed to bring in for this diversity and inclusion talk. Right. And so, and it's God bless him. And a lot of people are trying their hardest, but you are putting a lot of people that may just not have a grasp of it just yet. And it's good that companies are trying to change, but it's created this very interesting space that, we have been able to come into some of these bigger companies and say we work with a lot of these nonprofits that do a lot of work in this space that you were saying that you want to make an impact. So we can put together this event and we can put together these campaigns and stuff because we already have all these connections with the people that are doing the work. My job is never to be like, okay, well, if this, if you want to help this type of person, this is how you do it. I will bring it over to the nonprofit or bring it over to the social impact organization that I work with, that I know that they've got boots on the ground in that neighborhood that you are trying to work in. And so it's this interesting space that I don't know if there's any time in history that I would have been able to just go into some of these executive rooms or talk to these executives without a much larger track record. Just because a lot of people are scrambling to make that impact.
Yeah.
And again, God bless them. A lot of people are trying really hard incorrectly, and they should be consulting with people. Yeah. I mean, Joe, the amount of times that I'm walking away from meetings, like, some of these ad agencies are on retainer for like $5-10 million. And in the ideas that they're coming up with is like, oh, I don't think you've ever met somebody that is in this demographic that you're saying that you're trying to help. And so that's like one side of it. The comedy side of it is this other interesting thing, because yes, we do a lot of social impact projects. That's what I'm passionate about. But the majority of what we're doing is employee engagement stuff, right? So it's this thing that, especially during the pandemic, early pandemic, right? We kind of forgot the social utility that laughter has, right? That I had got so mechanical with stand-up comedy that you go up on stage, you tweak this, tweak that until you get the perfect joke, and it was all a formula, right? And you kind of just forget that when you break it down, people are having tough lives and they just need some levity, and they just need a break in that to stop thinking about all the things that they are worrying about, right? And so it was this thing that we started getting tons of emails after shows from an accountant, from from just somebody that was in the audience. And there's like, yo, that was the first time I've laughed in a week, right? Like, especially like early pandemic, like I had one email. It was the first time the guy had laughed in 2 months, he said, which I don't know if he has something like at home, like we've gone 60 days without one laugh, like, like one of those factories where people are trying to
A big whiteboard on the wall.
yeah, exactly. He just erased it during the show. I'm just like, hell yeah, we did it. We got it. We got the numbers off the whiteboard. But it's this thing where one of the comments that we got was we didn't realize how many inside jokes we were going to get as an office, right? And so it was just kind of this thing of shared laughter and shared jokes that there are all these unforeseen things. Like, so much of what I have done has been moving out of necessity, or moving out of, the pandemic happened, so we had to pivot here, we had to pivot there. And I'm lucky that the direction that we started sprinting in was a direction that is making a bunch of people laugh that probably wouldn't have otherwise laughed. So
yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, it's incredibly sad to think that someone's gone 2 months without laughing.
That was crazy to read. I was like,
yeah.
I think you don't, maybe your English isn't great. Like, I was just like, no, he was
You hope they're exaggerating.
right.
I mean, that's, yeah, but it's true. Like, we are in difficult times, and you think of especially back in the summer of 2020. Oh my goodness, that was a rough time with the pandemic and all the social upheaval, and my goodness, and the political stuff. Like, it was a really rough time, and lots of people had super high levels of stress and anxiety. And so, yeah, absolutely, finding a way to find levity. I was commenting to my wife the other day. I think it's one of the reasons why that show Tiger King took off so well. It's such a crazy show, and it just took off because people were desperate to just have something to lighten the mood. And I binged watched that whole thing back when it came out, like within a 2 days or something. But I haven't touched the second season because I don't care now. Like, I
absolutely don't care. I haven't even no thought of my head was like, oh, I should check out the second season. I have, through the pandemic, you have these like snapshots of kind of where you were. Like, you think that you were doing okay, and then you but as you said, Tiger King, I have this vision of me with a bottle of gin watching in, because I was working in DC as things started to close down. So now I'm in this Airbnb studio apartment, and I'm just locked in DC, and I'm just like, okay, well, I'm getting a bottle of gin and I'm watching Tiger King. And that was and as I say those words aloud, I was like, okay, you were not doing very well, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, excellent. So why don't you explain to us a little bit about how some of these go? So you're infusing comedy into team building and engagement, right? And you're putting social impact efforts into that. So maybe describe for the audience a little bit about how typical events might go if they've never even conceived of something like this, and they might be interested in trying to pursue something similar.
Sure. So the initial like Q&A process is usually very quick, right? I meetings typically don't go longer than like 15 to 20 minutes, but first question everybody gets, content oriented. Is it safe for work? We always keep it at a PG-13 level unless asked to do otherwise. It's usually lawyers that are asking us to do otherwise. And the second question has to do with diversity, right? So we are in a very lucky place that we are headquartered in New York, work with a bunch of people from Comedy Central and HBO and all sorts of stuff like that we have access to the up and comers and the A-list comics, but we always want to make sure that as many perspectives are illustrated as possible, right? And so the virtual is very straightforward. You have your virtual happy hour, your sales meeting, team meeting, all hands meetings, and we do an hour comedy show with 3 comics, 1 host, and it'll look a lot like the lineup that you would see at like the Comedy Cellar here in New York. The we will find a venue, we will set it all up and set up a whole production for your team to just come and enjoy it. We are very fortunate that we are talking to all sorts of people that are linking us up with their companies, and our number one goal is to make sure that that person looks good when we take off, because that is all we need, is to just walk out of the room or close that Zoom, and now you're getting a reaming from your boss because of some topic matter or something like that. But yeah, so we've done 200 plus of these, so we've become very good at navigating and tight-roping the touchy work environments and stuff like that. And the responses that we've heard back have always been, we're very lucky, knock on wood, we've only received positive reviews.
Yeah, that's super cool. And like you said, it's always wise, under promise, over deliver, make the people who hire you look good. always a good thing. And I have to admit, like I remember back in the day, the first time I ever went to a workplace event that had a comedian. This was probably, I don't know, 15. No, it was longer than that. It was probably about 20 years ago. And it was pretty bad.
Horrible. Absolutely horrible.
And I just don't think there was any connection. Like I'm not sure who set it up. I'm not sure who the comedian, I don't remember who the comedian was. There clearly was no acknowledgement of like the business or who the people were that were sitting there in the room. It fell totally flat. There were things that were said that were incredibly inappropriate for a workplace setting. Like it was just really bad.
Well, because think about the two people in that decision-making process. There's person A that says, whatever, we just want something to entertain them. And there's person B that's like, we'll sell you whoever you'll pay for, and we don't care, because once you made the transaction, where we are much more about like cultivating relationships and stuff like that. Like 30-ish% of our business is return customers just coming back on a monthly basis. And so it is this thing that we will ask a lot of questions about: who is your team, what do they do, where are they living, all sorts of stuff, and get prepped. Like, we want to make sure that the event is as enjoyable for everybody as possible. Where there's also this weird disconnect in comedy that typically, if you're a quote unquote corporate comic, you're probably not going to be seen at the prominent clubs, and you're probably not going to be there are very good comics that started in corporate. It is very rare. And typically if you are staying in the corporate circuit, you're not the highest caliber.
Sure.
Which obviously that's a generalization, and any corporate comics that are listening, I'm so sorry. So just message me on Instagram. We'll see if we can get you on a show or something.
Yeah. Super interesting. So that's all wonderful. I like the real honing into the client needs and
sure,
asking those questions. Always important. It's important for any consultant going into a business trying to figure out how they can move the needle, make a difference, have an impact. They should be doing the same thing. They should be asking those questions. And so it always befuddles me when I see certain types of events held where clearly none of that happened.
It's crazy to me. Like, people will tell, like, because there's so many people that I talk to, they're like, pretty much what you said, right? Like, either our company booked a comic 5 years ago, or I was part of an event 10 years ago. And it's crazy to me that a comic would come up and just start talking like all X-rated when you're talking to like a sales team. I will tell you, one time I really messed up was I had just moved to New York. It was my first like real big paid gig, and it was at a WeWork, like this big WeWork, probably about a 300 person audience. And they had the IPO like 2 days before. Right. And so WeWork was tanking. And I thought I was at a WeWork that was like a bunch of people renting out the office space, but it was their corporate office. And so I got on stage and started talking about how these people better find new offices because their landlord is doing this and their landlord's doing that. Not realizing I was talking to the executive board that had just made a bunch of mistakes publicly. And so that was my first ever
ouch
paid gig in New York. And so That is the horror story. That's the only one that I've had a mishap like that, but I did. Yeah, it was.
Well, it may be fortunate that that was one of your first experiences, because you learned
I
you learned
know.
firsthand what not to do. Yeah, so that's good.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's comedy is made of all sorts of those experiences. Like, okay, well, I never want that to happen again. So let's be a little bit more diligent.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Stephen, it has been a pleasure. I note the time. I'm going to have to let you go here in a few minutes.
Cool.
But before we start to wrap up, uh, can you share with listeners how they can get connected with you, where they can find out more about what you're up to? And I know you have some new initiatives specifically with healthcare workers that you're focusing on. You can tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap up.
Cool. So that initiative, if you know a healthcare worker, if you know somebody that works at a hospital, if you work with a hospital or a healthcare organization, hit us up, because we are starting to tour the country, performing at hospitals and performing around hospitals for healthcare workers in cities around the country. It's a pretty, it's, if anybody needs a little bit of levity and anybody needs a little bit of laughter, it is our healthcare workers. Them over the last 2 years, and God can only know how fatigued they are to not be getting that support. So we would love to be going in and entertaining healthcare workers. And so to get those shows funded, we're working with the healthcare organizations and the hospital groups, but we're also having different companies sponsor the shows and private donors sponsor the shows. So hit us up at ustreetcomedy.com/contact. You can find me on Instagram, Stephen Campbell Comedy, STEPHEN. I just started TikTok, and I hate those words even coming out of my mouth. But but Stephen Campbell Comedy there too. So yeah, feel free to reach out. We're having a lot of fun, making a lot of people laugh, and we'd love for you guys to be a part of it.
Awesome, Stephen. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, though, you just mentioned TikTok, so I have to just double click on that. So, this is the new engaging app that particularly younger people love and they're using, but increasingly, old fuddy-duddies like you and I are using as well. So I'm curious what you find about the platform that you hope will be compelling and help as you continue to promote your own work and the work of the firm.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could give an answer that didn't sound so shallow, but it is where people are, and I've got so much content from recorded shows and like dozens and dozens of joke notebooks that putting out content is relatively easy. I don't have to keep on like rebuilding it, but it's just a marketing channel that is something that needs to be paid attention to.
It's increasingly relevant, right? Especially for younger populations.
And we can push it off as much as we want, but it's gonna be there no matter what. And so, or not no matter what, I don't know what happens in the next couple of years, but yeah, it's what everybody's on, and it's where you have the best chance of going viral. And it has algorithms that really hyper focus your target audience. There's all sorts of analytics in it that Instagram just doesn't have. So yeah, I've been putting it off forever. And so the next endeavor is NFTs and figuring out what the hell that means. It's crazy, man, because like 10 years ago, I'm 32 years old. 10 years ago, the difference between a 32-year-old and a 22-year-old is like a couple words. Maybe the outfits look different. Like now there's whole economic systems that I don't even know about, right? Like there's like whole world economies that 22-year-olds know about that a 32 doesn't know. So I'm just desperately trying to learn, and I feel like an old grandpa in Jinko jeans, like just trying to figure out what's going on. But here I am on TikTok, Stephen Campbell Comedy. Follow me to be very underwhelmed.
Thank you, Stephen. It has been a pleasure. I really encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Stephen and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.
Thanks.